This is the Rich Dad StockCast with Andy Tanner, the show that kicks 401ks in the asphalt and teaches you to be the master of your own stock investing domain. And here's your host, Greg Arthur.
Welcome to Rich Dad StockCast with Andy Tanner, the brains of the show. This show, hey, suck it up, buddy. That's how it works. I'm the guy that asks you questions, and then you're the guy that brings the intelligence to the show.
Oh, wow.
Sorry.
Oh, wow.
No pressure there. No pressure. Hey, while we're talking, everyone, please click like. Let Andy be shared with more people. And also write in the comments. The last show, in fact, we did based on someone's comments, and I think it was about mistakes that Andy's actually made. So we do read those. There are some bots in there, so feel free to ignore those. It's super irritating. But anyways, welcome to Rich Dad StockCast. This show is called "Is the Dollar Doomed?" And sometimes I hear these shows, that talk about the dollar and macroeconomics, and I think to myself, this stuff doesn't apply to me. But obviously it does. Gas rises, but even that, you're like, nothing I can do about that. But just 2 days ago, I don't want to get emotional here, so forgive me if I do. A friend of mine called, and his kid got beat up by a car. And so their insurance companies are involved, legal stuff is involved. And he comes to me and asks for, what do I ask for? What do I do? And I got to at least give what I think is one piece of wisdom, and that is, don't settle on a dollar amount. You need to have a calculation there where the amount rises as inflation does. So as the dollar is being killed and died off, your daughter's taken care of. And so that just shows you how important knowing what's going on with the dollar is, because it's very possible he could have got $1 million, and next year $1 million is worth nothing, and he can't take care of his daughter. So not to get emotional, I apologize for that, but
that's rough.
Yeah. But it's one of the advantages of getting to work here at Rich Dad is you do get to help your friends and express things to them in a different point of view. Oh, and I should also thank Robert for letting us use the studio. I think it's kind of cool. I wanted to keep the logo back there because it's an honor to be here. So anyways, Andy Tanner, is the dollar doomed?
Is the dollar doomed? It might be. I think everything's doomed eventually, because if you look at history, you can often, not all the time, I don't know that history always repeats itself, but throughout time, things change. Empires change. The Egyptians ran things for a long, long time. China had a dynasty for a while. The Roman Empire lasted a very long time. The British Empire less, and the United States Empire maybe even less.
Yeah.
It seems to change a lot. So I wouldn't ever say nothing's unchangeable. The dollar, its position in the world has changed over time. And understanding how that works is kind of a big deal. The history, I don't study history just because it's interesting, even though it is. But when you understand the narrative of where things came from, you can, like my book 401ks, if you understand where they came from, you can say, wow, that's kind of a strange occurrence. So I think there's a lot, and this is very much on my mind today, so I'm excited to talk about it. But in a word, the dollar is going to change. We'll talk about whether it's doomed to destruction or whether it has a different fate, but it's certainly going to change. Yeah,
because Robert Kiyosaki, he talks about this a lot, and he's constantly, he's telling me the dollar's dying, and what are some of the reasons that he brings to us to express his concern?
Well, I think in my brain, and it's interesting, you'd say how Robert cares about it, because I've been a student of his for since Rich Dad Poor Dad came out in the 90s. And I've been a Rich Dad advisor, which just means I'm more of a student. I just learn more and more often than for the last 15 years or whatever it's been. But the older I get, the more I invest, the more I care about the dollar. It's really interesting. So I think there's internal reasons to care about it as an investor, and there's external things you see that make you care about it. Internally, I'm doing a second edition. I'm fortunate enough to be invited to do a second edition of my book in the Rich Dad Advisor series, Stock Market Cash Flow. And in that book, one of the sections I've written, I call Bet on Inflation. Bet on it. Almost every asset class, whether it's stocks, real estate, commodities, your own business, whatever it is, inflation or deflation is something we care very, very much about. That's the rising tide or going out that raises or drops all the ships.
Right.
And if you look at Warren Buffett, he's made his money on inflation. You mentioned that, if you're going to settle with someone in a negotiation in a litigation situation, think of all the people that aren't litigating. What do you do? Let's say they did give them a cash award. Well, it's really, what's interesting about your comment is there's a problem for all of us not knowing how to invest.
Yeah.
The real question of life is, what do I do with the money? What do I do with it to protect it? It's always slippery, slipping through your fingers. So internally, the reason I think he cares about it is it's the tide. It's everything, right? Inflation, deflation. If you are Robert Kiyosaki and you invest, a lot with Kenny in real estate and you love to use the leverage of debt, it's essential for that to work that you have inflation. Because if you have deflation, you can get upside down. A real estate investor, and I don't have near the real estate Robert and Kenny do, but I do have what I think is a significant amount. Compared to them, it's insignificant because they're real estate guys. But I also love real estate because it's the best way to take a short position on the dollar. That's the way I see it. And you can hear Warren Buffett say, this is how you short the dollar. It's a great way to short it.
Well, hey, let's talk about that just real quick. What we mean by short the dollar and why debt is so important in inflation, because it's probably one of the key principles that Robert teaches right now. So if you don't mind going over that, but before you do, since that is so important.
You're such a teaser, man.
We got to go to commercial. I'm so sorry. Well, it's I have like one role here. 2, ask questions, go to commercial. That's the only reason I'm here. It's not to look pretty. All right, so let's go to commercial.
Hi, this is Andy Tanner from the Rich Dad StockCast and founder of the Cash Flow Academy. If you're enjoying what we're teaching here, then I think you'll also really enjoy a special on-demand web class I've created for you called How to Cash Flow Stocks. I'm giving this free training to you because it's never been more important to enhance your financial education. Hey, who knows where the market will be next week or next year? For me and my team, we really don't care because we use strategies that will give us protection and cash flow no matter what is happening in the market. So if these are the kind of investing strategies you'd like to learn for yourself, go to StockCastBonus.com now and get this training at no cost. You can access this free training right now at StockCastBonus.com. So head on over to StockCastBonus.com now and I'll see you on the inside.
All right, welcome back. I think we left you off. We were going to hear the number one reason why Andy Tanner, Robert Kiyosaki believe inflation is coming.
Well, we were.
And we're also going to talk about.
I was shorting the dollar.
Yeah, how to use debt.
So I'm not going to go into we could do a podcast on short positions in themselves, but basically, a short position is where the investor will benefit if whatever they're using loses value. And the way to put it simply is if the value of whatever's in your asset column grows, your net worth grows. If the value of whatever's in your liability column shrinks, your net worth grows. So there's really 2 ways to build a net worth over a long time, become very, very wealthy. Either buy things that are going up in value or borrow things that are going down. Either one, and the opposite of that will, of course, reduce net worth. So you're always looking for things to buy that you think will go up. You're always looking for things to borrow that will go down. Well, you begin debt with borrowing. You begin the real estate process. That's the first thing you do. Borrow some money, buy a house, rent it out, and return the cash to the bank. 4 steps. And those 4 steps of borrow, trade, get it back, and return is basically shorting and stock, shorting whatever you want. So if you're going to take a large amount of debt on, and you're going to borrow this thing to buy the other, not only does that have to increase, but the thing you borrowed has to decrease. Because if the thing you borrowed increases, then you have to pay it back and get more of that thing. So we'll talk about Poland. We'll get into that a little bit, but those are the internal reasons we care about it. As an investor, it affects everything you do, whether you get upside down or not in debt. Whether you're outpacing inflation, saving is a horrible idea because you're not outpacing inflation. So the value of a dollar really matters, inflation, deflation. Externally, we watch for different things. I was once in Canada with the Lannons, Josh and Lisa, Rich Dad Advisors, and we were talking about the things that could bubble and bring down. And I drew a balloon on the chart and a whole bunch of different pins out there. So as it goes bigger, the question is, which pin does it hit first? Because It's not like there's one thing that can bring down a bubble. It can be a lack of liquidity. It can be a lot of different things. But that was noteworthy because they asked me, what do you think some of these pins are? And one of them, if we're going to talk about, is the dollar doomed? One of the important things to understand is the history of that dollar. So the dollar comes from Europe. And, if you Google what the word dollar means, it's European in origin. But when the United States broke away, the 13 colonies broke away from Britain, they needed the currency. I mean, the British pound, if you're fighting with the people that provide your currency, you're in trouble. So there was a silver coin that was very common, and they call it a dollar. And people trusted it. It was precious metal. It was widely used and exchanged, and it was literally called a dollar. So what a dollar used to be is a silver coin. That's what it was. It was a certain weight and a certain amount. People trusted it, and the Congress said, you know what? This is what we're going to use as legal tender. People seem to like these. Let's use these dollars. And so that's fine. This went on for a long time, and you can read more history of how it changed and, where notes started and having notes represent all this. But the biggest change, the most significant two changes, is, first of all, something everyone should learn in school. It's insane that you could go through high school in the United States and have any type of history class and not learn about the Bretton Woods Agreement. The Bretton Woods Agreement is where post-World War II, the war's over. We're going to try and get commerce going again. And in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, they had a meeting with many, many countries, dozens of countries came together, and they said, how can we streamline, commerce? How can we make it safe? And in those days, the dollar had evolved to where it was a piece of paper that was backed, a certain percentage of it was backed by gold in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And also there's a huge gold depository at the New York Fed. Federal Reserve Bank in New York. So between the New York Bank and Fort Knox, there's basically a bunch of gold backing this. And this was really important because it established the dollar. This is so important. It established the dollar as the world reserve currency, meaning that if you wanted to buy stuff, it was going to be denominated in dollars, and you were going to, you have a thing called a petrodollar. If you want to buy petroleum, you're going to use a dollar to do that. And so converting a currency to a dollar and borrowing from the United States in dollars, and the infrastructure, more complex for what we want to go through in the podcast, but there's a lot of dollar that has got its tentacles into the infrastructure of global trade. And so as time went on, when you create a system, you kind of become dependent on the system. For example, you didn't have email as part of your system, and you didn't have texting as part of your system, and you didn't have even a cell phone as part of your system, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Try to operate without the web
That's funny. When you just said they back in the 40s, they brought everybody to Bretton to discuss this. I was like, they couldn't Zoom or they couldn't fly. So these
Isn't
guys
that
are taking
something?
boats. Holy cow.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. And so once you put a system in, for example, as an educator, I used to, as a salesman, even I used to be in sales. That's how I got into trading. I'd sell trading software, and I'd fly all over the place to a seminar or a trade show or wherever I could to pitch this company's software. And that's how I actually got exposed to trading stocks. I thought, well, maybe I could learn to use this stuff instead of just pitch it all the time. And so, the idea of Zooming and the idea of it just changes your system. So anyway, the dollar is infiltrated in the systems of the world financially. And as a result, it really benefited the United States. It just gave the United States a leg up on the entire world. They had just kind of conquered everyone militarily. They became a nuclear power, and they were willing to deploy that power in Japan as the only country that's ever deployed it. And so they had military might, and now they had financial might. And those two things in combination just put the United States in a tremendous position of power. And with power, there's that old saying, with great power comes great responsibility, from Spider-Man, or my kids say that a lot.
Right.
I'm glad to hear them say it because it's true. Whether the United States has been a great steward of that power is in question. In my opinion, they have not. Other people can give opposing opinions. But in 1971, we had a problem where, France and other countries, they wanted their gold. It's redeemable for gold. Give us our gold.
Right.
So Fort Knox is losing, we're losing all the gold. So Nixon says, we can't mine gold fast enough to keep up with the amount of money that needs to be created and borrowed. So in 1971, he says, okay, no more gold standard. And you can Google the speech, and it's a political speech. It's hot air. This is why this would be a good idea, and I'm not a crook, all that crap.
Right.
And you can Google Nixon's speech and listen to the, political rhetoric of it. But it is an interesting speech to think about, Greg, because so what was the whole purpose of us being the world reserve currency? Gold standard. That was the whole reason that everyone said, yeah, this is a good place to go. U.S. backs it by gold. We said, no, not anymore. So why wasn't that the end of it right there? That's the question. Why wasn't the world say, all right, well, let's have another meeting. Let's have another meeting and say who wants to back it with gold, right? And the infrastructure was so dependent on the dollar that it'd be like saying, hey, we're going to put the U.S. in charge because they have all the email capability. And then we come out and say, we can't email anymore. Well, we're so tied to what you do, then we're going to keep doing things with you.
So let me ask you a quick question. And this is something we talk about at Rich Dad all the time. Like,
yeah,
Robert basically, like, I think he would go back in time and kill Nixon. But at the same time, I don't
see. He was a Marine.
Yeah. I don't see another answer that Nixon could have done. Like, we had to loan all that money out to those countries so they could rebuild. Like we had a responsibility to help our allies rebuild. There wasn't enough gold to do that. So we had to change the system to the Bretton Woods. But what was he going to do? Let all the gold leave the country? Like,
I think it was less about, we loaned a couple $2 billion to Japan, same to some money we granted, infused capital into Japan to rebuild. And you're right. The bigger reason was the second point you made, is they're just claiming the gold. And as population grows, you need more dollars, or it becomes more scarce and harder to get. And so, so there you go. And the funny thing is, the best speech I ever heard Robert give, I've never heard a better one. We were with his friends, Robert Helms and Russell Gray, on the real estate.
Oh yeah, great guys.
Fantastic. Shout out to those guys. I love those guys. And they had a summit on a cruise ship every year. For years they did it. I'd been a couple of times, And Robert gave a speech on that boat, on that ship, that was just unparalleled. And it was funny because Ed Griffin, who Robert and I way respect, gave a speech called End the Fed.
Yeah.
And Robert got up the next day and he gave a speech called Be the Fed. And the Fed was like the greatest thing ever to make guys wealthy. So on the one hand, we say this makes no sense to print all this money. But on the other hand, it's the best thing a real estate investor could ever hope for. And Warren Buffett and all the wealthy people. It is the reason there is a wealth gap in the United States. The middle class is toast and the lower class is toast and the underclass is really toast. And the upper class is getting smaller too. It's separating. Well, the reason is some people are after money and other people are after assets. That's the real difference. Robert doesn't want any cash. The moment he gets cash, he's looking to get rid of it to trade it for an asset that's going up in value. And he just constantly is getting more cash because he's buying golden geese with it. So he gets more golden eggs. And as soon as he gets an old golden egg, he wants to get a golden goose, so to speak. He wants the thing that manufactures money, not the money itself.
Right.
Most people go to work every day trying to get the money. And as a result, they keep trying to get something that goes down in value their whole life. And there's never an asset accumulated.
So to take that to stocks,
that wealth gap is the philosophy. If a person is after money, they're going to be in trouble. If a person's after assets, they're going to benefit from the inflation.
Okay, so quick question, then I want to take it a little sideways on you.
Then we got to get to the current events of why I care about this. Like, what are the signals today? Go ahead.
Okay. When you say assets that produce cash in stock markets, since it's the StockCast, we're talking about stocks that have dividends.
Stocks that dividends and stocks that are optionable.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Or even crypto that's optionable. I mean,
Sure.
Crypto is like the worst options market in the world. And I started teaching. I just went and opened an account like at nothing and just build it for my students. We started in last November. And we do an update on it every week in our Mentor Club. And I was looking at the update, yesterday we did it. I was just like, these options are garbage, but look what we're doing. It's an impressive education to see what we're doing with it. But anyway,
right.
Because it's cash flow. More importantly is this idea of the U.S. having their tentacles into the financial system and depends on the dollar. Well, that's starting to change now. And that's a big deal. If the United States fails to maintain their position as the world's reserve currency, that's one of the biggest things to watch, because Ben Bernanke gave a speech when he was a Federal Reserve governor before they made him the head guy. It was in 2002 or something. And he's giving this speech and he said, like gold, US dollars are only valuable to where they're limited in supply. And the United States has a printing press, or it's an electronic equivalent, that lets it produce as many dollars as it wants, effectively, affecting the prices of goods and services. Now, that speech, a lot of people think landed him the Fed job, the head guy at the Fed. The problem with that speech, when you read it, it's all supply side. It assumes a demand for the dollar, which is maybe a safe assumption for him at that time because it's the world's reserve currency. In other words, there was a demand for dollars because that's what you had to have to do things. You borrowed money from the United States, and the United States has, when you do a risk-free assessment, right? There's something called a Sharpe ratio where you can see if you're getting a return relative to the amount of risk you take. It's a really interesting dynamic. And that Sharpe ratio starts with a baseline of what does a risk-free investment deliver? And the risk-free investment of the world that everyone has felt is risk-free is a US bond, is loaning money to the government and buying, loaning them dollars. Well, they don't sell US bonds in yen, they sell them in dollars, right? And so, you got to get a dollar to buy that bond and get loan the United States money, basically. So that's your risk-free investment. Well, if if the U.S. loses their position as the world's reserve currency, the demand for a dollar, you have all the supply side of printing press, but the demand for those dollars, the world changes drastically.
Okay, I want to take you back to make sure I get this. When the whole world needs dollars, and I'm going to overstate this, so forgive me for that. We almost can't print enough, and so it's almost safe because the whole world needs them to function, and so there's
that's
a value,
the thought.
Right?
Yeah,
but
everybody needs dollars. There's always going to need. I mean, you can print a lot, like
because
you say, overstating.
Actually,
overstating. Of course, you could print too much that way too, but the demand is certainly there.
But so as soon as our demand isn't there, because let's say the dollar's not wanted for
your
trade
freedom
anymore.
To print is rough. It's rough, and this is all intertwined with fiscal policy, because now the U.S. runs on the United States runs everything on the premise that they can borrow from the world. You follow? That they can borrow from the world, and that the world would look at us as a risk-free investment, and they do right now.
Because you just said the U.S. bond is the safest thing, and when we sell a bond, that's really us borrowing from the world.
That's right.
Okay,
that's right. So when the U.S. Does their budget and they come up short, and they have a debt ceiling that's just laughable,
right?
Because all it is a chance for Democrats or Republicans to saber rattle, oh, we're going to shut down the government, and whoever's in power is at fault, and they saber rattle. But at the end of the day, they just raise the debt ceiling. They do it every time. They're going to continue to do it. And there's a perpetual raising of the debt ceiling because of the promises they've made, not just the money they borrowed, but the money they promised to Medicare and healthcare and Obamacares and Social Securities and pension funds and all the stuff. Government-wise, those are not borrowed dollars, they're promised dollars. So because we've promised them, we don't have them, we have to borrow them. And the world does it because it's a safe bet. If that unhinges, and we're no longer the world's currency, the very system of borrowing and being it's not even capitalism, it's creditism is what we're involved in here.
Right.
And so creditism is how the United States runs things. And if the dollar fails, now, you had a question, it looked like.
Well, I think I just saw something in the news the last couple of days where the dollar is being threatened. Do you know what I'm talking about?
There's a lot of things. For example, I was in Japan, and somehow they had an English newspaper. So it was a Japanese paper, but they printed an English version, which I thought was interesting. So I'm reading it, and they were griping about U.S. bonds. They were griping that we should do things in yen. We'd be better if we did them in yen instead of the dollar. So there's been griping about this for a long time. Well, here's a big one. The Saudis.
Yeah.
What'd you read?
What I read is the Saudis always sell their oil in dollars, only dollars. And because oil is what's the energy is the economy is run on energy, right?
Yes, it is.
So that gave the U.S., as you say, tentacles in every area of the world.
Absolutely true.
But as soon as the largest oil producer or one of the top oil producers changes that rule and accepts a different currency, all of a sudden the need for the U.S. dollars drastically shrinks.
So China, they don't like Bitcoin because they're like, we want our own crypto, we want to do our own, digital currency,
right?
And the Saudis are like, China's got a lot of people, the U.S. maybe isn't giving us the military protection they once did. Maybe we don't like how they're handling the Russian situation. Maybe we think, well, would they really help us or whatever? And so they look at China and say, yeah, we'll do business with you and we'll sell oil for your currency. Yep. That gives a respect to China's currency over respect for the U.S. currency. They're ready to have another partner. And those little changes that can happen where the system changes to where Bitcoin changes things. A lot of people like Bitcoin because it circumvents a central bank in the production of it.
Right.
It doesn't circumvent governments from regulating it or taxing it. The government's still in control. Whoever has the guns have control. If you're a Bitcoin guy saying, ha, 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 I'm free of the government, well, don't pay your taxes. See how that goes, right?
Right.
The government owns everything. You know, we're all servants of the government. But with crypto, the other thing about, other than just its creation circumnavigates a central bank, it's inexpensive to transact. You have $1 billion transaction. It's much better to do it through crypto cost-wise than it is through dollars, just banking fees and all the different mechanisms it has to go through to go from a euro to a dollar. You know,
Right.
Try to change euros to dollars and see how that goes in terms of exchange rates, because there's fees to do that, and there's just the gas fees in crypto are just lower for the time being.
And do you know, is Saudi Arabia accepting Bitcoin as well?
Yeah, I should read on it. I don't know. I don't want to say that for sure, but I mean, the idea, the fact is that there are so many other ways to transact, and it's changing. And here's the biggest thing, though. One of the things that disappoints me is people that abuse. I don't know. They're like, you run into some people in business where they will step on someone's neck because they can.
Yeah.
And they'll take a win-lose because they're so big and so powerful they can do it. And they go home and high five as if it's a win for them. And they love the winning of the chess game. And some people love the win when the other guy loses, right? It's that jujitsu. I just tapped you out or whatever.
Right.
For me, I love the win-win in jiu-jitsu. You know, I love that I may have tapped, but you got better, I got better, right? I don't ever regret that stuff. And I love businesses deals that are win-win, where there's a fair exchange and no one felt like, how do you feel when you spend money on taxes compared to when you spend money on something you get to choose on your own? So if you have a position of leverage, and this is why I believe communism cannot work, is once you have communism, now someone has to decide what's best for the community. You still have a leader. We're not all holding hands here.
Right.
And so when people are forced to do things against their will, there's something in the human spirit that wants to do what they freaking want to do. And it's funny because you can find any socialist you want who says, well, there should be a law, and there should be a law, and there should be a law. And they love all these laws that don't affect them, that put, as long as everyone's thinking the same way, this is how it be. But as soon as you point that law at that person and you say, well, this is for the greater good. Well, it's not my greater good.
Right.
There's a human spirit of freedom that burns. And it's why communists, China's done a real good job of holding on to that power for a long time, but it's really tough. It was tough for Russia. It's tough to hang on to that control because people want that freedom. Well, let's look at the United States' position of the world's reserve currency. When we went to Bretton Woods, we made them a world currency because we wanted them to be. Is that still the case? Has the United States done a good job with that stewardship to the point where now, no, we still want to use the dollar, everyone. Go dollar, go. I feel that there are many, many countries, reading that Japanese newspaper, we don't like this anymore. We feel that we're doing it because we have to, not because we choose to anymore. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that says this isn't going to last. Because you can't, unless you want to become militant, a dictatorship that will militarily support your, ensure your position, which the United States, I don't think would do. I don't think they would go there.
Well, they did. I believe the history is anytime an oil producing country accepted anything but the dollar, all of a sudden we claimed they were a dictatorship and had to free the people, and they were gone. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Well, why'd you remove Saddam? I don't know how all that stuff works. I don't care about that politically, but I do care about this. I know that if the world doesn't want to do it, they're going to find ways not to do it.
Well, just with what you said about China and Saudi Arabia accepting the the China currency, doesn't that mean the whole world can now convert theirs to China to buy oil? Or are they only accepting it from China? Do you know that?
No, that's a deal between the Saudis and China.
Okay.
Right. That's a deal between them. But what it does is it does put a crack in the armor, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Right. It
Gotcha.
does say, okay, the Saudis, or are they open to taking rubles? The Russia's got more oil than they can deal with. But, are they open to taking euros? Are they open to taking this? The other thing people, say, well, I don't care about this. This is overseas. I just go to the grocery store and buy my stuff and I write my check for my mortgage. How does this affect me? It affects you huge, both inflationary and deflationary. If it's inflationary, think about this. If you're in Russia, I talked earlier about a short position on the dollar, putting something in your liability column that goes down to get more wealthy. Think about this. Let's say you're in Russia and you're a lot like a guy in the United States. I've heard this. It might not even be true. I hate saying stuff I just hear. But you've heard similar things where the average American has $400 in the bank and that's it.
Right.
And they have student loan debt and credit card debt and mortgage in the hundreds of thousands. Okay. All right. Now think about that. So if you're in Russia, let's say you're in that same situation, you got 400 rubles in the bank, right? And you've got hundreds of thousands of rubles in debt. Well, if you crash the ruble, are you really that upset?
Right.
Because now it takes since the ruble isn't worth anything, I'm not showing up to work unless they give me what?
More, or a different currency, or
a huge amount of a raise, right? Because I come to work for you because it helps me feed my family. I can't do that anymore. Now you get to pay off that debt. You have so many more rubles. The debt didn't grow, but your income did, and you're paying off those rubles for pennies on the former ruble, right? And so it's the greatest, for some people, it's like, this is awesome. I mean, imagine living in Mexico and they decide to take a couple zeros off and reset the currency. Oh my gosh, what does that do to your debt? It's awesome. It clears it, basically. It wipes out debt. And so while it wipes out savings, it also wipes out debt, right? So if you had a ton in the savings and no debt, didn't help you. If you had a ton of debt and no savings, it helped you.
So this is only true if your debt's at a fixed interest rate.
Yeah, that's true. If you're variable, they'll change the rate. But this happens to ordinary people. There's a wonderful story about the people in Poland, the Polish people, is they use a zloty, the Polish zloty. I think I'm pronouncing that, probably destroying it, but I'm hoping I'm close. The Polish zloty. And they would earn zloty, okay, but they would take out their mortgage in Swiss francs because it was a better deal. And the Swiss franc, pegged itself to the euro or whatever it was. And one day they said, we're going to unpeg from that currency, and we're just going to let it run free. Well, the value of the franc went through the roof. And all of a sudden it took 20% more. Think about this. It took 20% more zloty now to come up with the franc. So basically, what does that do to their mortgage payment? Well, now it's up by 20%. The amount of francs you owe didn't change, but the amount of zloty you had to come up with to get a franc to pay it back changed by 20% overnight.
Wow.
Imagine and they actually went to court on this, and the socialism took over, and they went to the Supreme Court, the Polish Supreme Court, to say, hey, this isn't fair. Come on, this isn't fair. Well, you're the one that chose to do this. Well, we're ignorant. If they actually assume, there's no responsibility for being financially savvy, so they fought this, and it was a big mess. Well, that's a peace-loving country. That's not Venezuela with a dictator nut guy. That's not North Korea. That's not Zimbabwe with a dictator. That's a freedom-loving country, a NATO ally, I believe Poland is. And there you have a big deal with mortgages. So as the U.S. currency goes up and down, if you're a saver or if you're a borrower, either one, I would care very, very much beyond just going to the gas pump or the grocery store. I care about what's going up. If I have tons of debt and the United States, does well in relation to other currencies in terms of its value, well, what happens if the dollar doubled in value? You'd be underwater in most of your mortgages, because now you'd have to get a lot more rent, or you get a lot less rent. A dollar would go further. So instead of having $1,000 a month, if the dollar is valuable, the rent would only be $500. Well, if your payment is $750, you're $250 underwater, and you're having a hard time getting dollars. You're toast.
Right.
So I think that's why real estate investors, stock investors, investors of all kinds, anyone that uses any kind of leverage, they got their eye on this, because the value of the dollar matters. Is it doomed? Well, I would just say that if the rest of the world doesn't like the United States, we haven't made friends, they don't respect the United States, they feel they've been bullied by the United States, they feel that they've printed money and enriched themselves, and they have the biggest GDP in the world, and they're like, you know what, it's about time we get our own currency, or we, did this better, and we don't want the internet. So there's a wonderful book. I would say it's called Financial Cold War, U.S.-Sino Relations. It's a great book on this history to read it and to see where it's headed. But yeah, the dollar is going to change. How it's going to change and when remains to be seen. But if the rest of the world doesn't want the system we have right now, they will be an agent for change. And the U.S. will be left to defend its position of the world reserve currency. If that goes away, the demand for dollars goes down. Now, what the MMT guys will say.
Wait, MMT is modern
monetary theory. Thank you. I didn't mean to use jargon without defining. The modern monetary theorists, the Warren Moslers of the world, the Stephen Keltons of the world.
This is Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders' crowd. What they will say is, we can create demand for dollars, because if the world doesn't want them, we'll create demand from our own citizens. We'll raise your taxes. And if we raise your taxes, now, if you want to live, you got to get more dollars to pay the taxes. If you're used to $100,000 a year or $50,000 a year, okay, we'll tax you $25,000 of that. Well, if you want to maintain your standard of living, you better go earn more of them.
Right.
That creates more demand for dollars, because you got to have them to pay them. And what's the penalty if you don't? It's jail. And what's the penalty if you refuse to go to jail? Well, they'll come to your house with guns, right? They will physically force you. And if you say no, as soon as you draw your gun, you're done. So it gets from social to primal pretty crazy, in the theory of it all. It's kind of extreme, but.
So, Andy, we do got to wrap this up, although I don't want to wrap it up with going to jail. But honestly, it's so funny, because everything comes back to, you got to get educated. You got to study this stuff, and it does affect your day-to-day life, whether you want it to or not. It's just the reality.
Yeah.
You have to get educated. And one other thing, you keep telling them to buy other people's books. Hey, here's an idea, people. Look at Andy's courses. Hey, I got this crazy idea.
You're funny.
Andy teaches this stuff, but in all truth, if you go to our show notes, you can click on a link and get a lot of Andy's free education. I put that in every show note, because I appreciate
the plug.
There's a ton of value. So I'll stop talking about it.
Well, let me grab this one. Like, when we become valuable is some people don't have the time to read this thick stuff. And so I read it, and then I try to simplify it for people. Is what
it's like a 5-inch book. Jeez, I'm shocked you could even lift that.
That's very doorstoppish, But here's a real plug for education in general. Look, see how this feels when you hear it. Does it ring true, and does it make sense? If a person says, I want to improve my financial position, I'd like to have more wealth, and I think I'd use that wealth responsibly, right? I think it'd bring me more freedom. I want to have more wealth, I think. I want to have a legacy for my kids where it's maybe not so tough for them, or whatever your wealth goal is. It would make sense to study the thing you wanted to get good at.
Yep.
Does that ring true?
Absolutely.
So if I want more dollars coming to me every month to buy more assets, to have more dollars come. And I want to create that upward spiral. Study money, study dollars, study currencies, study trade, study these types of things. And I think your chances get better of getting good at something that you study. I'm always a student because I always feel it's like my first day. There's so much I don't know, but I'm so grateful that along the way, despite all the train wrecks and the bad decisions, the mistakes, and the learning, if you wind up with a couple assets in a time like this, I don't know if it gives you total peace ever. I don't know if anyone's total. There's always problems, but there is a greater, I think, of feeling like I'd rather have assets than not.
Right.
in a situation like this. And so while guys like me and Robert and Kenny have probably done it more perfectly than I have, but I've bummed along, but just the effort of it over the years, you'll wind up with an asset or two if you choose to buy them. So
Right.
All
right, Andy.
Thanks much. Always good to be with you. And one more thing, you mentioned if people want to say, hey, do a show on this or that, I'm interested in more detail on this or that. I love that stuff because we're here to serve as many people as possible. And so if you have something that's on your mind or it comes on your mind, this is a resource for you. Type it in and use this as a resource. We'll do the best we can for you.
All right. I appreciate you saying that, Andy.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, man. You too.
Bye.
Bye.